Welcome to Capitol View on WSIU. I'm Brian Sapp. Coming up this week, we'll talk about the impacts some national events and laws are having on the state of Illinois, from Medicaid cuts to tariffs. And while it's not political, we're going to cover an event that brings Illinoisans to the Capitol. We're just a few weeks away from the Illinois State Fair. We'll talk with the fair manager and find out what you can expect from this year's fair. Joining us this week are Jason Piscia, the Director of Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Peter Hancock. He's a reporter for Capitol News Illinois. Gentlemen, welcome on this hot July day.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
We'll start with the big, beautiful bill. It was a budget and reconciliation bill that was signed almost 2 weeks ago by President Trump. And one of the things that they tried to do to be able to make the tax cuts permanent was some changes. Some call it cuts, others, I think, reductions of spending on Medicaid. And here in Illinois, there's quite a few rural areas and some rural hospitals, and Governor Pritzker listed 9 of those that they're worried could close. Peter, you did some reporting, talked with the Illinois Health and Hospital Association. What did you find out, and how is this going to affect our hospitals?
That's right. And it's interesting that this is happening this month. Is the 60th anniversary of the day that Lyndon Johnson signed his one big beautiful bill creating Medicare and Medicaid. It was in July of 1965. And so now 60 years later, we're seeing this massive change. Over those 6 decades, Medicaid, which wasn't really the big news when Johnson signed Medicare into law, Medicaid has grown into a huge segment of the overall healthcare marketplace in America. So this bill, President Trump's domestic policy bill, cuts about $1 trillion of future Medicaid spending over the next 10 years. It's a huge amount of money, and the way they do that, it especially affects states like Illinois that expanded eligibility for Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, the law that was commonly known as Obamacare. Mm-hmm. And it affects the way that these states fund their share of the costs and the way they distribute the money in the form of reimbursements to hospitals and other kinds of healthcare providers. The bottom line is that Medicaid now covers about 1/4 of the population of Illinois. It's a huge program. In rural areas, it covers an even larger share. The rural areas in the United States have a disproportionately larger share of their population covered by Medicaid. And so the hospitals in those areas, which many of them are already operating on a financial brink right now, when they see their payments decline, and their reimbursement rates are going to decline substantially under this law. There's a concern that many of them will either have to dramatically scale back services, lay off staff, or even close entirely. And the ironic part is that it's hitting the rural areas, which are the areas of America and of Illinois that are Donald Trump's political base. I mean, that's where, he did very well in rural states and in rural counties, but not so well in the large urban areas like Chicago. And the Medicaid cuts are really going to hit his political base. And that was, I think, the theme of the governor's statement. It was a letter to the Republican members of the Illinois congressional delegation saying, hey, before you vote on this, you might want to look. These are your hospitals, your communities. In the end, all 3 Republicans, Mary Miller, Mike Bost, and Darren LaHood, all voted in favor of the bill.
I noticed that in the letter here in Carbondale. Mike Bost is our representative. And in the area that we have reach on the TV stations here, I think there's 8 of the 8 of these hospitals lie in our area. I was talking with,
And to be fair, a lot of hospitals all over the state are going to
sure,
be affected by it. I think that the governor's letter was highlighting hospitals in Republican districts to make sure that the Republican members of Congress knew what was going to happen. Obviously, it did not have an impact on their vote, but it may have an impact on voters in those districts in the next midterm elections.
I have to say I've learned a lot about Medicaid this past couple weeks because I've been doing some reporting for our radio here, and I talked with the CEO of Southern Illinois Healthcare, and he said this is going to hurt a lot of even their hospital. They're a larger group. Some of the other hospitals that were laid out were smaller ones. In the bill, there was this provision for $50 billion for rural hospitals. Have you heard is this going to be enough?
It will partially offset some of the losses that rural areas are going to experience. There's a nonpartisan health policy analysis group called KFF, formerly known as the Kaiser Family Foundation. They estimated that this bill is going to reduce Medicaid payments in rural areas by about, I think it's around $155 billion. And so that $50 billion is part of some rural health initiative, the details of which we know very little about right now, is only going to be a partial offset. Overall, they are still going to experience deep cuts.
And that's what the CEO said yesterday. This $50 billion, they're still trying to figure out the rules to be able to take advantage of that. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how this bill impacts the hospitals as we go forward. Another national topic, and it's been back in the headlines this week with tariffs. President Trump is making some new rounds of tariffs, trying to work through, I think it's his negotiation tactic, but Governor Pritzker released an executive order this way to direct some Illinois agencies to kind of start studying this. Jason, what did the governor's executive order lay out, and what's it going to do?
Yeah, this executive order, which he signed on Monday, will direct about 7 state agencies to look at the effects that tariffs would have on the state, and then come up with a plan for mitigating the effects of those tariffs. This is a bit of maybe a political move on Pritzker's part to lay out to the public and lay out to voters and lay out to people paying attention that your prices will go up. I think that's what he's trying to prove in the quote that accompanied the news release with the signing. Pritzker used his typical standard wording of calling it the Trump slump when you add tariffs to the prices of things. So they're going to ask departments like the Department of Human Services to look at the effect that tariffs will have on food donations and food supplies to help stock food pantries around the state. IDOT, the Transportation Department, they'll need to look at the cost of building materials and equipment to build and construct roads around the state. Looking IEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, looking at the effect on stockpiles for emergency supplies that may be needed in another pandemic or another widespread emergency around the state. I think they have 100 days to come up with these recommendations and this information, so that takes us into about mid to late October. The wild card in all this, as always, is President Trump himself. As you mentioned, the tariffs and the threats that he makes tend to be a negotiating tactic with countries. And, it seems every day or every week we get a new collection of countries and a new collection of tariff amounts and a new set of deadline dates for when these tariffs will go into effect. But as we've seen in the past, as we get close to those deadline dates, those numbers, those countries, those approaches seem to change. So even if the Pritzker administration does do a widespread study on the effect of these tariffs. Who knows what the numbers and what the effect will be by the time we get to mid-October.
It's constantly changing, and I think I read that Illinois and Canada, that's been one of the sticking points, that Canada is one of our biggest importer-exporters, that are trade with them, and we'll have to see how that impacts that and what the future holds for that. Want to move on to here in the state, Illinois, State Farm. Governor Pritzker announced or talked about a filing by State Farm that home insurance rates are going to be hiked up 25%. Peter, I understand that you're working on an article about this, and what can the governor do? Is he calling for changes in law? What's he looking for?
He is calling for lawmakers to address this issue in the upcoming fall veto session. And one of the things that this highlights is the fact that Illinois is a very low regulation state when it comes to property casualty insurance. The insurance industry is largely regulated at the state level. It's not federally regulated. And the amount of regulation varies widely from one state to another. We have a state Department of Insurance, like most states have. The head of that department is appointed by the governor. In other states, they are elected insurance commissioners. And in Illinois, in some states, they would have the authority to review rate filings and to possibly approve or reject or modify a proposed rate change. In Illinois, they really don't have that much authority. Just in recent years, under Governor Pritzker, the legislature has enacted legislation to allow giving the Department of Insurance more review authority over rates for health insurance, but not so much in property casualty insurance or in automobile insurance or other kinds of insurance products. And so this is really kind of bringing that to light. State Farm, which is based in Bloomington, is a very large employer in Illinois and a very large insurer, made a filing that they intend to raise homeowner rates by an average of about 27%. Interestingly, the Consumer Federation of America, a very large national consumer advocacy group, released a study earlier this year showing that from 2021 to 2024, Illinois had the second highest rate of increase in homeowners insurance. It went up by about 50% on average over that 4-year period. And now State Farm is adding another 27% on top of that. And I spoke with officials there, and what they're telling me is that basically they can do it in Illinois. Part of this is the cost of climate change. The insurance companies will argue that they have been suffering severe financial losses. They've been losing money in the property casualty line for a number of years because of catastrophic claims from wildfires, from hail, from tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, all kinds of events. It hasn't been necessarily as bad in Illinois as it has been, say, in California and, the Gulf Coast area, as well as parts of the Great Plains where tornado damage is more common. But it's been pretty significant in Illinois. And so insurance companies all over the country are raising their rates because of these catastrophic losses. The question is, in Illinois, does the state have the regulatory authority to really review that and make sure that it's not just price gouging of Illinois insurance customers? Because when it comes to this line of insurance, you really don't have a choice. If you take out a mortgage to buy a home, you're required to have insurance. And, unless people are indemnified for possible catastrophic losses from weather and other kinds of things, investing in real estate would be an extremely risky investment, and home ownership would be nearly impossible for most Americans. So insuring your investment in a home against these catastrophic losses is absolutely essential to maintaining a stable real estate market. The question is, to what extent should the state of Illinois be regulating the rates that are charged and the profits that are being made off of that insurance coverage?
We'll have to see how that does play out with all these, events, the recent flooding and things like that. It's kind of been, in our feeds on our TVs and things like that. And then I'm sure the also increase in inflation, repair costs have probably gone up. So hopefully we can find a balance for where this should all come down. And as a homeowner, I want to make sure my home's insured. Got about 3 minutes left here in this segment. And Jason, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Senate race. Senator Durbin announced in April that he's not going to run again for his seat. We've had 3 people hop in, and this week it's like all of a sudden the campaign's on. Can you kind of give us an update of what we've got going on in these last few minutes?
Yeah, things are happening. We're still a full 8 months away from the primary election in March, when we'll decide the nominees for each party to replace Dick Durbin in the U.S. Senate. But things are happening. It seems like it's always campaign season living here in Springfield, but it's revealing itself across the state as well. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, who is the most well-funded Democrat in the race at this point, he has about 8 to 9 times more money in his campaign coffers than his next closest opponent. He dropped about $500,000 on a TV and streaming campaign this week to get on the air first. He's the first candidate to come in with a commercial, sort of maybe forcing the hand of the other 2 declared candidates in the race, which include Congresswoman Robin Kelly and Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. So, like I said, he's the most well-funded, and we'll see if it prompts the others to jump in and start spending some money as well. But also endorsements are coming from both sides as well. For Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, she had an event this week where she got the endorsement of Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch, which was expected. They both served together in the House, and he helped her with her previous campaigns as well. So that provides a big boost to her campaign. Also, Stratton previously received the endorsement of Governor J.B. Pritzker, who's expected to drop a large amount of money into her campaign at some point. As far as I know, that hasn't happened yet. So she's still a little bit behind quite a bit behind in the fundraising race. Others have gotten endorsements as well. Krishnamurthy touted some endorsements from lots of local leaders up there in the Chicago area. And Robin Kelly also has endorsements from former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot and some others. So things are moving. We're coming up on state fair time. We'll be interested to see if those candidates make their way down here to Springfield to campaign during the Republican and Democrat days that typically happen during the middle of the fair. So it's 8 months away, but the fun is starting.
That's I've started getting the Illinois Capitol facts, and it's been talking about today. They didn't even talk about the Senate races, and they talked a lot about the state House races and everybody moving around. So I think we're going to see a lot of things coming around in the next few months. Jason and Peter, thank you for joining us this week. It was great to have you guys on.
Thank you.
July in Illinois means festivals and county fairs in just a few weeks. The Illinois State Fair kicks off in Springfield. Earlier this week, I talked with Illinois State Fair Manager Rebecca Clark about what you can expect at this year's fair. The Illinois State Fair begins on August 7th and runs through the 17th. Rebecca Clark, she's joining us from the State Fairgrounds there in Springfield. As I was preparing for this interview, I found a press release from last September. It said you were already planning for the 2025 fair. That's just 3 weeks from now. How has the planning gone, and what can fairgoers expect at this year's fair?
Well, not only are we planning for the 2025 fair, but I'm also planning for the 2026 fair as well. Yes, but yeah, you're
Great.
right. We're only a few weeks away. I think my kids, I have 4 kids at home, and they like to remind me, Mom, only 3 more Thursdays until the fair starts. So they're keeping me on my toes from the moment I get up.
That's right. 3 more Thursdays. Okay. So what can people look forward to as we get closer to the fair?
Well, I can tell you that the Illinois State Fair is shaping up to be one of the biggest and best that we've put together so far. We have 11 days of family fun entertainment, agricultural spotlights, and just a great time for everybody here in Springfield, Illinois.
What are some of it's been a while since actually, I have an admission to make. I've never been able to make it to Springfield for the fair, but what are some things that people, that you find are the most popular events there at the fair?
Well, I can tell you that a number one must see when you come to the State Fair in Springfield is to visit with the butter cow. In fact, here's a little secret. The
Okay.
butter cow is being sculpted as we speak. 3 weeks
cool.
out. So that butter cow is being sculpted this week right now. Every year the sculptor, Sarah Pratt, she also does the cow in Iowa. But they always put together a design that is built around our theme. And this year our theme is Adventure Awaits.
Okay. Adventure awaits. So who is the fair for? I'm assuming everybody, but who is it for?
Absolutely. Great question. The fair is for everyone. We really do sit down and plan a fair for everyone, from our musical lineups to make sure that it is well diverse with multiple genres for a little bit of everyone, to the entertainment programming that we offer, so that it makes sure that we have something that caters to children, to parents, to teenagers. For example, we have easy for me to say, a magician. I always say musician, but it's a magician for kids. We have a selfie gallery for those teenagers who like to have their phone in their hands all the time, right? We have over 165 plus hours of free entertainment here that's catered to make sure that we meet the needs of everyone.
So we've got rides at the fair, there's concerts, there's displays, exhibitions, and animals. Do you have what's a crowd favorite? What are the things that when people come in, they say that they're looking for?
The butter cow is the number one. Everyone has to see the butter cow. The Grand Central Stage is something that everyone likes to kind of gravitate to. This is an open air pavilion that's got food trucks, adult beverages, kiddie beverages, and then a live music stage. And we bring in some pretty big names for that free concert series. Another one that is returning this year is the Budweiser Clydesdales. So for our animal lovers, the Budweiser Clydesdales will be on display. So that's another one that I expect will be can't miss. We've also got the carnival. We've got 2 carnivals, the Carnival Midway and the Adventure Village. So one's for the older kids, one's for the younger kids. And then we've got our grandstand, which will have 9 nights of concerts with tickets on sale right now. And then a multi-purpose arena where we have motorsports action like a monster truck show, the truck and tractor pulls, your traditional fair venue entertainment options. And then we also have our historic Coliseum where we'll have agricultural shows, horse shows all throughout the fair.
You do plan for all of the diversity of people around Illinois. For people that are going, what are some of the specific details? Admission, times, things like that. What are some tips and information for people that want to come?
Great question. So we pride ourselves in being one of the most affordable state fairs in the Midwest. We've pride ourselves on the fact that we haven't raised our admission and parking for quite some time. So it's just $5 on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, with $10 on Fridays and Saturdays. And to make sure that we're being extra frugal, we've got a $2 admission day on Tuesday of the Illinois State Fair. Parking every day on the grounds is just $5. And then we have several promotional days where we have veterans and their immediate family members will get in free on Veterans Day. We have first responders and healthcare heroes, where our first responders and our healthcare workers will get in free on the second Friday of the fair. And then senior citizens and scouts who show up in uniform get in free on Monday.
Great, lots of opportunities for people to come in and be able to have some good fun. We got just about 30 seconds left. What are you talked about your kids and only 3 more days left. What's their favorite thing besides the butter cow?
Well, my kids keep asking me, when are the rides going to show up? When will the rides start showing up? And we don't live too far, and so we drive by the fairgrounds quite a bit. And one of their favorite things is when they see those rides start to show up.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. It sounds like there's going to be a little bit of something for everybody, and we thank you for joining us, and good luck.
Thank you.
The fair runs from August 7th to the 17th. You can find schedules and resources for your visit by going to their website, statefair.illinois.gov. That's it for this week's edition of Capitol View. Join us next week as we look at what's making news around the state of Illinois. On behalf of Jason Piscia and Peter Hancock, I'm Brian Sapp. Thank you for joining us on Capitol View.